So today's video is going to be process of a pro number 3. If you guys remember, my last process of a pro video was the mid-game video, and I explained that there's going to be 2 parts to the mid-game videos. In the last episode, I covered mid-game fights, and in today's episode, I'm going to be covering mid-game positioning and rotation. I took inspiration for this series from Your Fellow Arabs Inside the Mind series, and I want to give some credit to him. But anyways, be sure to use code Sonata Wkey in the Fortnite item shop if you do want to support me. Let's hop right into this video. So to start off, I want to go over the 3 types of lobbies that you're going to be playing in these competitive tournaments. The first one is known as a Wkey lobby. This is where the majority of the players are going to be dying off quick, and there's tons of players who are going to be getting as many kills as they can. This is often going to be found in the first couple games of any cash cups, and before you really have a solidified amount of points that put you in high level lobbies. People are going to be running around the lobby trying to get as many kills as possible, and there's going to be 1 or 2 teams that have the majority of the kills. The next type of lobbies are called passive lobbies. This is where the majority of players are going to try to play passive and reach those stacked endgames. Storm Surge is going to be very prevalent in this lobby, and you need to know how to handle that. And then the final type of lobby is the most common amongst cash cups and FNCS opens. This is going to be mixed lobbies. These are lobbies with some people Wkeying and other people playing passive. Most of the time it'll be a pretty even split of who's Wkeying and who's playing passive. But those are the 3 types of lobbies. Now let's hop into how to play in today's current meta for the mid game. I'd recommend that in modern day you guys try to play more passive because Wkeying is useful, but a lot of people are getting really good at fighting, and there's a much higher risk to reward ratio for Wkeying. For passive gameplay, you're going to be getting more points, and you're also going to be getting more experience for the future of Fortnite. Now getting into 3 tips for every lobby that you play in, regardless of what type it is, I'd recommend you do 4 primary things. The first one is going to be rotating early. If you rotate early to every one of your mid-game zones, you're going to be able to properly get into the best position and make sure that you have the map control over people around you. If you guys don't remember, map control is basically where you control a certain area or people in that area by maybe doing damage to them or controlling their builds, maybe being on an elevated position. Map control is extremely important, and I'm going to be referring to it even more in this video. The second tip I would recommend for every mid-game lobby is to rotate dead side. Regardless if this is Wkey, passive, or a mixed lobby, I'd recommend you always try to rotate dead side. Dead side is going to be the side of zone that has the least amount of people on it, and the general rule of thumb to find a dead side of zone is to see what side of zone is closest to the edge of the map, or what side of zone is closest to the least amount of POIs if the zone is central. Or you can just scout what side dead side is by looking through your code and seeing where the least amount of people physically are. Dead side is extremely useful because you're going to be able to get to a place where nobody's going to be Wkeying you and congesting your rotations and ideas. That's why I would recommend you rotate there every single lobby. But on top of rotating there, I'd recommend you also fight dead side. I know I'm not supposed to be covering fights in this video, but if you are looking for any fights at all during the mid game, I'd recommend you fight them dead side. This leads to a less likely chance of you being third-partied by any other teams, and it's extremely useful for materials, loot, and overall positioning in the long time run. And the last tip is going to be a little bit more specific towards actual zones, but I'd recommend that for zones 2 and 3, you should rotate in the middle of them, and then for zone 4, you should try to position yourself on the edge for a slight chance of pulling half and half zone. After zone 4 begins the end game, so I'm not going to cover anything after that. And before zone 2 is known as the early game, so I'm not going to cover anything before that. But those are the 4 tips I would recommend that you master for every single lobby, and now let's dive into specific tips for the types of lobbies. Now starting off with the rotations and positionings during your Wkey lobbies. During these games, since the majority of players are fighting and looking for eliminations, you should try to rotate dead side as early as you can, and then you should either have one of 2 options. I'd recommend you either keep your team moving from place to place, depending on where zone moves, depending on where the fighting is, and you can take a fight at your own risk if you want, or I'd recommend that you box up in a highly elevated and protected position. I'd recommend you do this as early as possible, and in return, this will prevent you from being Wkeyed by any teams that are trying to fight you. In Wkey lobbies, your positioning should be in places where you can gain knowledge of 3 things. You should always have knowledge of where the people are on the map, where the people are rotating, and where the people are fighting. Understand that places where there are supply drops, major POIs, and old build fights, there will most likely be players looking to rotate there. This is some of the stuff that you have to remember for these Wkey lobbies. All of that stuff applies to both solos and duos, but hyper-focusing on duos, the IGL should be calling these rotates and constantly looking for information through peeks and visuals when boxed up. Peek through cones, peek through windows, peek through walls. I'd recommend you don't try to look for any Storm Surge very specifically, because in these lobbies, most of the time Storm Surge won't be popping because all of these players are being Wkeyed and getting eliminated. So just try to play it out, try to play for placement and be the last one standing, and then hopefully win your fight in the end game. Then moving on to rotations and positioning during your passive lobbies. During these games, since the majority of the players are playing passive, once again, you should try to rotate dead side as early as you possibly can. Then, the best play of action is to find an elevated and protected position and start looking for Storm Surge tags. What this is going to do is help you build up Storm Surge for later in the game and not have to worry about it later as the end game is moving on. Continue doing this for zones 2 and 3, and then if you want to take fights, do it dead side and finish them quickly. I'd recommend you take fights during zone 2 rather than zone 3 because zone 3 has a lot more people and a more small amount of area during passive lobbies. And the benefit of finishing these fights quickly is that you're able to not get third partied and able to rotate faster. The best way to improve on rotation during passive lobbies is to practice scrims and then get to zones fast through the dead side. And the 3 things that you need to remember while you're rotating during passive lobbies is that you need to learn from your mistakes as an IGL. And the 3 things you need to remember while rotating passively is to obviously get to a very protected position. I'd say that elevation is pretty much everything during the mid game. The higher you are, the less chance of being W-keyed you have, but not just that. On top of focusing on your position, I'd recommend that you guys also try to focus on getting that Storm Surge up as quick as possible. That is really important, and that's going to eliminate any and all issues of Storm Surge that you do have in these passive stacked lobbies. Another small but important tip is to also focus on getting your loot up really fast. If you have really good loot, you have a much higher chance of winning during the end game. Try to get as many rotation devices, launch pads, anything you possibly can to rotate. That's going to help you out throughout the end game, or if you need to escape through something during the mid game. As you play more and more, you're going to learn from any mistakes that you make, and in duos you're going to be able to adapt as an IGL. Continuing on that trend, in duos, passive lobbies are breeding grounds for placement points, and your position and rotations will determine how much surge you get, how good your loot is, and in turn, how well you do in the entire game. That's why it's so important to master these passive lobbies as duos, because these are the types of lobbies you're going to be competing in those games 7, 8, and 9, and 10 of your FNCS Opens. You're also going to be playing in all of these games during FNCS quarters, pretty much any of these tournaments that are past the Opens level. You're definitely going to be playing in these passive lobbies, so you need to know how to play them. Now going into the short section of the final type of lobby, which is the mixed lobby. In mixed lobbies, your IGL should be able to read the lobby, determine whether it's more of a W key lobby or more of a passive lobby, and then based off of your points and your ability to fight as a team, you should either decide to play the game as a passive or W key rotation game. Mixed lobby rotations don't really have a definitive answer to them. It's kind of just what you prefer to do. So I'd recommend your IGL gets really good at reading what type of lobby it is. A really good rule of thumb for IGLs to read these types of lobbies, if you get to second zone and there's less than 50 people left in the game, it's a very high chance that this game is not going to be very stacked and is most likely going to be a W key lobby. But if you get to second zone and there's more than 50 people in the game, there's a high chance it's going to be a stacked lobby and you guys need to play very passive. There's no definitive answer for mixed lobbies, and you need to get really good at reading them in order to learn how to play. That's the best tip that I would recommend for any and all IGLs competing. And a quick final tip that I want to throw in, as you guys know, cars were removed and vaulted from competitive, and this causes a lot of issues for people rotating during the mid game. So what I'd recommend is that you guys try to get your loot path and loot route down to a science. You need to be able to fight and loot your POI as quickly as possible and then rotate on foot by running, sliding, using any of the new movement abilities and getting to the center zone as fast as possible. Obviously, there are still things like those wind tunnels, those launch pads, those turbines, those zip lines. Those are all really useful utensils. But still, because cars are not in the game, it's really important that you learn how to rotate on foot very efficiently. Be sure to sprint, be sure to slide down hills, be sure to swim. All of these things will help you out a lot. But yeah, that is the process of a pro video number 3. If you guys did enjoy, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel down below. I'm really happy with the way this series is going and your guys' feedback to it. The last video did insane numbers. Thank you guys so much for that support. And I'm going to keep making these videos for you guys to try to get you as good at Fortnite as you possibly can. These in-depth guides are going to be very useful as time goes on, and they're going to get even more in-depth as I learn more and more about how to play the game better. But that's about it for this video, guys. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye, guys.